My name is Eleanor Thompson, and at 68 years old, I never expected to spend Christmas night shivering in my daughter Valerie's attic. I arrived with homemade gifts and an open heart, only to be told the guest room was reserved for important visitors. Little did Valerie know that beneath my modest sweater and sensible shoes lay the secret to $20 million I had quietly amassed over decades. As I laid on that dusty mattress, I made a decision that would change everything. Where are you watching from today? If you have ever dealt with ungrateful family members, hit subscribe before we continue with my story. I was born in a small town in Minnesota, where my parents taught me the value of hard work from an early age. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. My father worked at the local factory for 40 years, and my mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. They instilled in me a fierce work ethic and the understanding that money was something to be respected, saved, and invested wisely. When I was 23, I met Richard Thompson at a community college where we were both taking night classes. Richard was different from other men I had dated. He wasn't flashy or boastful. Instead, he was thoughtful, intelligent, and had a brilliant mind for numbers. We married within a year, and together we created a life plan that would eventually lead to our financial independence. Richard worked as an accountant, and I started as a secretary at a real estate office. Within 5 years, I had earned my real estate license and was selling properties myself. We lived comfortably but modestly in a 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood. Our philosophy was simple: live below your means and invest the difference. By the time our daughter Valerie was born, we had already accumulated significant savings and investments. Richard had taught me everything about financial literacy, from compound interest to diversification. We never flaunted our growing wealth. Our cars were reliable but not luxury models. Our home was comfortable but not extravagant. We took vacations but stayed at modest hotels rather than resorts. As Valerie grew up, I noticed her attitude toward money was vastly different from ours. While we tried to teach her the value of saving and investing, she seemed more interested in spending and showing off. She wanted designer clothes in middle school. She complained about our embarrassing car when I dropped her off at high school. She begged for expensive spring break trips that her friends were taking. Richard and I tried to balance giving her opportunities while teaching her values. We paid for her college education but insisted she work part-time jobs. We helped with her first apartment but made her pay a portion of the rent. Despite our efforts, Valerie seemed to grow more materialistic with each passing year. When Valerie met Bradley Whitmore during her senior year of college, I had concerns immediately. Bradley came from a wealthy family and had never worked a day in his life. He had an air of entitlement that reminded me of some of my most difficult real estate clients. But Valerie was smitten. They married in an extravagant ceremony that Richard and I thought was excessive, though we contributed what we felt was appropriate. Richard passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. It was the most devastating moment of my life. We had been married for 40 years, and he was not only my husband but my best friend and financial partner. After his death, I decided to continue keeping our financial status private. Richard and I had always been private about our money, and I saw no reason to change that, especially given Valerie and Bradley's attitudes. In the years following Richard's death, I noticed Valerie and Bradley's lifestyle growing increasingly lavish. They bought a 5-bedroom house in an exclusive neighborhood. They drove luxury cars and took expensive vacations. Yet whenever we spoke, they complained about financial pressures and bills. Bradley had started his own investment firm, but from the little information Valerie shared, it seemed to be struggling. Our relationship grew more strained with each passing year. Our phone calls became less frequent. Valerie rarely visited me, though I lived only 30 minutes away. Holiday gatherings became tense affairs, with Valerie and Bradley often making subtle comments about my modest lifestyle and fashion choices. Despite all this, I still looked forward to Christmas this year. I always held on to hope that our relationship could improve. Perhaps the holiday spirit would soften Valerie's heart. I spent weeks knitting scarves for Valerie, Bradley, and my 2 grandchildren Sophia and Noah. I baked cookies using Richard's mother's recipe. I carefully selected books that I thought each family member would enjoy. On the outside, I looked like a typical grandmother in my comfortable slacks, cardigan sweater, and practical shoes. My silver hair was cut in a simple bob, and I wore minimal makeup and jewelry. Nothing in my appearance suggested that I had a portfolio of commercial real estate properties, substantial stock investments, and enough money to buy Valerie's house 10 times over. The day before Christmas Eve, I packed my small suitcase with my holiday outfit, the carefully wrapped gifts, and containers of homemade cookies. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to Valerie's neighborhood, passing through the security gate after giving my name to the guard. The houses in this area were enormous, with perfectly manicured lawns and elaborate Christmas decorations. Valerie and Bradley's home stood prominently on a corner lot, with white columns and large windows showcasing a towering Christmas tree in the foyer. I parked behind a sleek sports car I didn't recognize and gathered my belongings. Before I could ring the doorbell, the front door swung open. Valerie stood there in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her blonde hair perfectly styled. "Mom, you're early," she said, checking her watch. There was no hug, no warm welcome. "Hello, darling." "The traffic was lighter than I expected," I replied, stepping inside with my arms full of packages. Bradley appeared behind her, phone in hand, barely looking up. "Eleanor, good to see you," he said distractedly. I set down my bags and held out the container of cookies. "I brought Richard's mother's famous gingerbread cookies. The ones you loved as a child, Valerie." Valerie took the container with a tight smile. "Thanks, Mom. We have a caterer handling all the food for Christmas, but maybe the kids will eat these." I swallowed my disappointment and followed them into the living room. The space had been completely redecorated since my last visit. New furniture, artwork, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system filled the room. Through the large windows, I could see that the backyard now featured a swimming pool and outdoor kitchen that hadn't been there last Christmas. "You've made some changes," I observed. "The house looks lovely." Bradley puffed up with pride. "Just finished the renovations last month. The pool house isn't quite done yet, but it will be by summer." "It must have been quite expensive," I said carefully. Valerie and Bradley exchanged a look. "Well, we're managing," Valerie said with a sigh. "Bradley's business has had some challenges this year, but we had already committed to the renovations." "The market's been tough," Bradley added defensively. "But things will turn around. I've got some promising clients lined up for next quarter." My grandchildren, 10-year-old Sophia and 8-year-old Noah, raced into the room, eyes glued to their tablets. They mumbled quick hellos when prompted by their mother, then immediately asked when dinner would be ready. "Just say hello properly to your grandmother," Valerie instructed with exasperation. The children looked up briefly. Sophia's eyes flicked over my simple outfit with a hint of the same judgment I often saw in Valerie's eyes. Noah gave me a quick side hug before returning to his game. "I have gifts for you both," I said, reaching for the packages. "Can we open them later, Grandma?" "I'm at a really important level," Noah replied, never looking up from his screen. "They can open them tomorrow with the other gifts," Valerie interjected. "Speaking of which, Mom, we need to discuss sleeping arrangements." I nodded, expecting to be shown to the guest room I usually stayed in during my infrequent visits. "We have Bradley's parents coming tomorrow, and his sister Jacqueline and her husband are already here. They're out shopping right now. And Bradley's college roommate Trevor is coming with his new wife," Valerie explained. "I see," I said, though I didn't understand why she was telling me this. "The thing is, all the guest rooms are taken. Bradley's parents will have the main guest suite, of course. Jacqueline and Dennis have the second guest room, and Trevor and Melissa will take the third." I waited confused. Their house had 4 bedrooms plus Valerie and Bradley's master suite. "So, we were thinking you could stay in the attic room. We've put a mattress up there. It's just for sleeping anyway, and I know you go to bed early," Valerie said, not quite meeting my eyes. I felt as if the air had been knocked out of me. The attic? Not even a proper bedroom, but a storage space with a mattress thrown on the floor? I see, was all I could manage. "It's just that Bradley's parents are older and need the ensuite bathroom, and Jacqueline is bringing her designer clothes for the Christmas dinner and needs the closet space. And Trevor is Bradley's most important client now," Valerie rattled off excuses. I thought of the home where I had raised Valerie. It wasn't as grand as this house, but it was warm and comfortable. Whenever we had guests, Richard and I gave up our bedroom if necessary to ensure everyone had a proper place to sleep. We would never have dreamed of putting a guest, let alone a parent, in an unfinished attic. Let me show you where you'll be staying, Valerie said briskly, already turning toward the stairs. I followed her up 2 flights of stairs, the second being a narrow pull-down ladder to the attic space. The ceiling was low, forcing me to hunch slightly. A dusty mattress lay on the floor with a single pillow and blanket. A small lamp sat on an old nightstand, casting weak light in the gloomy space. There was no proper closet, just a metal clothing rack. The air was stuffy and smelled of mothballs. The bathroom is down the hall on the 2nd floor. You'll have to share with the kids, Valerie said. Dinner's at 7. Bradley's sister and her husband should be back by then. With that, she descended the ladder, leaving me alone in the attic. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, feeling the springs creak beneath me. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had always given Valerie everything I could, from emotional support to financial help when she needed it. Richard and I had paid for her education, her wedding, and the down payment on her first house. Now in her grand home, there was no space for her mother except an afterthought in the attic. As I unpacked my small suitcase, placing my neatly folded clothes on the rack, I remembered how Valerie had lived in a beautiful bedroom in our home, with a canopy bed she had begged for. Richard had built her bookshelves and a window seat. We weren't wealthy then, not like we later became, but we had given her a lovely childhood home. The contrast between that memory and my current surroundings was stark. I smoothed the wrinkles from my holiday outfit, a simple but elegant burgundy dress that I had worn to several Christmas gatherings. It wasn't designer, but it was good quality and flattering. Still, I knew Valerie would find something to criticize about my appearance tomorrow. As I made up the mattress with the single sheet and blanket Valerie had provided, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Hurt, disappointment, anger, but also a deep unconditional love for my daughter that persisted despite everything. She was still my child, even if she no longer treated me with respect or consideration. I sat on the edge of the now-made bed and pulled out a small photo I kept in my wallet. Richard and me on our 30th anniversary, smiling into the camera. What would you do, Richard? I whispered to his image. I could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. Stand up for yourself, Ellie. You deserve better than this. Christmas Eve dinner was an elaborate affair. The dining room table had been extended to accommodate all 10 guests, and was set with fine china, crystal glasses, and sterling silver flatware. The caterers had prepared a feast. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, scalloped potatoes, and various salads and sides. Expensive wines flowed freely, with Bradley making a show of describing each bottle's vintage and region. I found myself seated at the far end of the table, between 8-year-old Noah and Trevor's new wife Melissa, whom I had just met. Bradley's parents, William and Catherine Whitmore, occupied the seats of honor near Valerie and Bradley. They were dressed impeccably, with Catherine wearing what I recognized as an expensive designer outfit and a diamond necklace that caught the light with every movement. As conversation flowed around the table, I quickly realized I was being excluded. Whenever I tried to contribute to a discussion, someone would talk over me, or the subject would abruptly change. Bradley's sister Jacqueline kept glancing at my simple dress with barely concealed disdain. So Eleanor, William Whitmore addressed me during a lull in conversation. Valerie tells us you're still living in that same house after all these years. Yes, I replied. It's my home. Richard and I were very happy there. But it must be so much work for you now, all alone, Catherine chimed in. All those stairs and that big yard to maintain. I manage just fine, I said. I enjoy gardening, and the stairs keep me active. Mom refuses to consider downsizing, Valerie said to the table at large. We've told her about those nice retirement communities, but she won't hear of it. I'm perfectly capable of living independently, I replied firmly, and I enjoy my neighborhood and my routines. But surely at your age it would make sense to sell that big house, Bradley added. Property values in your area have increased. You could make a nice profit and have something to live on. The implication that I needed money from selling my house to survive stung, especially knowing that I owned the entire office building where Bradley rented space for his struggling investment firm. The conversation moved on to Bradley and Valerie's plans for a summer vacation in Europe. We're thinking of renting a villa in Tuscany for a month, Valerie announced. The children should experience different cultures. That sounds lovely, I said. Your father and I took you to Europe when you were 15. Do you remember how much you loved Venice? Valerie gave me a tight smile. This will be quite different, Mom. We're looking at exclusive properties with private chefs and housekeeping staff. You should come, William and Catherine, Bradley added. We could make it a family trip. No invitation was extended to me. I glanced around the table, wondering if anyone else noticed this slight. No one met my eyes. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room for drinks and dessert. The grandchildren were allowed to open one gift each, a Christmas Eve tradition. Both Sophia and Noah selected large packages from under the tree, which turned out to be the latest electronic devices. Neither child showed much excitement or gratitude, already asking about the rest of their gifts for the following morning. Remember when you were little, Valerie? I said quietly as we watched them. You would be so excited about each little gift, even the oranges and chocolates in your stocking. Times have changed, Mom, Valerie replied dismissively. Kids expect more these days. It's different now. Later, as I excused myself to use the bathroom on the second floor, I overheard Valerie and Bradley talking in their bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Do you think your mom could help us with the Tuscany rental? Bradley was asking. It's going to cost more than we budgeted, and with the business being slow, I don't know, Valerie sighed. She's always been so tight with money. You'd think she'd want to help her only grandchildren have amazing experiences. She must have some savings, Bradley insisted. She and your dad lived so frugally all those years. Maybe, Valerie said. But getting her to part with it is the problem. She still acts like she's going to run out of money any day. I quietly continued to the bathroom, my heart heavy. They saw me as nothing more than a potential source of funds, despite believing I had limited means. When I returned to the hallway, I noticed my toiletry bag had been moved from the counter to a small shelf above the toilet, making room for Jacqueline's extensive collection of beauty products that now covered the entire vanity. That night, as everyone retired to their comfortable guest rooms, I climbed the ladder to the attic. The space was cold, as heat didn't reach it properly. I wrapped myself in the thin blanket Valerie had provided and added my coat on top for warmth. Through the small attic window, I could see stars in the clear winter sky. A memory surfaced of teaching Valerie about constellations when she was little, her small hand in mine as we traced the patterns of stars. What had happened to that curious, loving child? How had she become this materialistic, dismissive adult who treated her mother as an inconvenience? I had sacrificed so much for Valerie over the years. Richard and I had worked long hours to give her opportunities we never had. We paid for tennis lessons, summer camps, and eventually college without student loans. When she and Bradley bought their first house, we contributed to the down payment, though they could have purchased something more modest without our help. I tried to connect with my grandchildren earlier in the evening, asking about their interests and activities. Sophia had reluctantly shown me her social media accounts, full of carefully posed photos and brand names. Noah had allowed me to watch him play his video game for a few minutes before becoming frustrated that I was slowing him down. Neither showed any interest in the books I had brought them, or my stories about their mother as a child. As I lay on the uncomfortable mattress, tears slid silently down my cheeks. I missed Richard desperately in that moment. He would have known what to do, what to say to Valerie. Or perhaps he would have simply taken my hand and led me out the door to a hotel, where we would be treated with dignity. I considered leaving first thing in the morning. I could make an excuse about not feeling well, and drive home to my comfortable house with its memories of happier times. But something kept me from making that decision. Perhaps it was hope that things could still change, or perhaps it was simple stubbornness. I had a right to spend Christmas with my family, even if they seemed to have forgotten what family truly meant. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I began to consider options I had never seriously entertained before. Perhaps it was time for some truth. Perhaps it was time for Valerie to learn about the fruits of the values she had rejected. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. From my attic window I could see fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the neighborhood in a pristine white blanket. Despite my restless night on the uncomfortable mattress, I dressed carefully in my holiday outfit and applied light makeup. I may have been relegated to the attic, but I would maintain my dignity. When I descended to the main floor, the house was already bustling with activity. The caterers had returned to prepare breakfast, and the children were bouncing with excitement near the massive Christmas tree surrounded by piles of elaborately wrapped gifts. "Merry Christmas," I said cheerfully, entering the kitchen where Valerie was directing the catering staff. "Oh, good morning, Mom," she replied distractedly. "Coffee's over there. We're opening gifts in 20 minutes. The gift opening was a chaotic affair. Sophia and Noah tore through package after package, barely acknowledging each gift before moving to the next. The floor disappeared under mounds of expensive wrapping paper as the children accumulated piles of toys, electronics, and clothing. Bradley's parents gave the children envelopes containing what I later learned were substantial checks for their college funds, along with the latest smartphones, to replace the old models from last year. When the children finally reached the packages I had brought, the contrast was stark. My hand-knitted scarves and thoughtfully selected books seemed paltry next to the extravagant gifts they had already opened. Noah set his book aside without comment, while Sophia fingered the soft scarf and said, "Thanks, Grandma," before quickly moving on to more exciting presents. Valerie opened her scarf with a tight smile. "How traditional, Mom." "Thank you." Bradley barely glanced at the biography I had chosen for him based on an interest he had mentioned last year. "Thanks, Eleanor," he said, already turning his attention to an expensive watch from his parents. My own pile of gifts was small. A generic box of bath products from Valerie and Bradley, gift cards from the grandchildren, and a scented candle from Bradley's sister that still had the clearance price sticker partially visible on the bottom. As the morning progressed, I helped clean up the discarded wrapping paper and prepared to join everyone for the Christmas brunch the caterers were setting up. However, as I passed by Bradley's home office, I overheard voices and paused. The door was slightly ajar, and I could clearly hear Valerie and Bradley inside. "We need to talk to her after the holidays," Bradley was saying. "That house is too big for her, and she's not getting any younger." "I know," Valerie sighed. "But you know how stubborn she is about keeping Dad's house. Look, the market is hot right now. If she sells, she could get a good price, move into a nice retirement community, and maybe have something left over to help us with the kids' private school tuition next year." "She'll never go for it," Valerie said. "She acts like that house is sacred or something." "I've already talked to Jim at the real estate office," Bradley continued. "He can list it in January. We just need to convince your mom it's for her own good." I stood frozen outside the door, my heart pounding. They were planning to pressure me into selling my home, the home where Richard and I had built our life together, the home that was just one small part of my substantial assets. And they intended to use my supposed financial constraints against me. "It's not like she needs that big house anyway," Valerie added. "And honestly, the property taxes alone must be eating up whatever savings she has. We'd be doing her a favor." I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I needed fresh air. I slipped out the front door unnoticed and began walking along the snowy sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood. The cold air filled my lungs as I tried to process what I had just heard. Had it really come to this? My own daughter and son-in-law plotting to sell my house from under me to solve their financial problems? The same financial problems they had created through their own extravagant spending and poor choices? As I walked, another memory surfaced. Just before sitting down to Christmas breakfast, I had overheard Sophia saying to her cousin, "Grandma Eleanor gives the worst presents because she's poor. Mom says we have to be nice about it." That comment, coupled with the conversation I had just overheard, crystallized something in my mind. This wasn't just about money or nice things. This was about values, respect, and honesty. For years, I had allowed Valerie and her family to treat me with increasing disrespect while maintaining the fiction that Richard and I had created. But that fiction was now being used against me, and potentially against my grandchildren, who were learning all the wrong lessons about family and money. I pulled out my phone and called Thomas Gardner, my financial advisor of 20 years, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my wealth. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he answered warmly. "Merry Christmas, Thomas. I apologize for calling on the holiday." "Not at all. Is everything all right?" "Actually, no," I replied. "I need your help with something. Could you email me the current portfolio summary and bring a few key documents to my house tomorrow?" I think it's time for my family to learn about Richard's and my investments. Thomas was silent for a moment. Are you sure, Eleanor? You and Richard were always so private about your finances. I'm sure, I said firmly. It's time for some truths to be told. After ending the call, I stood in the snow for a few more minutes, gathering my resolve. Then I turned and walked back to the house, my decision made. Tonight, after Christmas dinner, everything would change. When I re-entered the house, no one had even noticed my absence. The day continued with brunch, followed by the adults exchanging gifts. I smiled and participated in conversations, all while a plan formed in my mind. I texted briefly with Thomas, confirming details for the following day. That evening, the Christmas dinner was even more elaborate than the previous night's meal. Everyone dressed formally, with Valerie wearing a designer dress that I recognized from a luxury department store window, likely costing thousands. The meal was delicious, but I barely tasted it, mentally preparing for what was to come. As dessert was being served, I gently tapped my water glass with my spoon. The table gradually quieted, and curious eyes turned toward me. I have something I'd like to share with all of you, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. From my attic window, I could see fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the neighborhood in a pristine white blanket. Despite my restless night on the uncomfortable mattress, I dressed carefully in my holiday outfit and applied light makeup. I may have been relegated to the attic, but I would maintain my dignity. When I descended to the main floor, the house was already bustling with activity. The caterers had returned to prepare breakfast, and the children were bouncing with excitement near the massive Christmas tree surrounded by piles of elaborately wrapped gifts. Merry Christmas, I said cheerfully, entering the kitchen where Valerie was directing the catering staff. Oh, good morning, Mom, she replied distractedly. Coffee's over there. We're opening gifts in 20 minutes. The gift opening was a chaotic affair. Sophia and Noah tore through package after package, barely acknowledging each gift before moving to the next. The floor disappeared under mounds of expensive wrapping paper, as the children accumulated piles of toys, electronics, and clothing. Bradley's parents gave the children envelopes containing what I later learned were substantial checks for their college funds, along with the latest smartphones, to replace the old models from last year. When the children finally reached the packages I had brought, the contrast was stark. My hand-knitted scarves and thoughtfully selected books seemed paltry next to the extravagant gifts they had already opened. Noah set his book aside without comment, while Sophia fingered the soft scarf and said, "Thanks, Grandma," before quickly moving on to more exciting presents. Valerie opened her scarf with a tight smile. "How traditional, Mom." "Thank you." Bradley barely glanced at the biography I had chosen for him based on an interest he had mentioned last year. "Thanks, Eleanor," he said, already turning his attention to an expensive watch from his parents. My own pile of gifts was small. A generic box of bath products from Valerie and Bradley, gift cards from the grandchildren, and a scented candle from Bradley's sister that still had the clearance price sticker partially visible on the bottom. As the morning progressed, I helped clean up the discarded wrapping paper and prepared to join everyone for the Christmas brunch the caterers were setting up. However, as I passed by Bradley's home office, I overheard voices and paused. The door was slightly ajar, and I could clearly hear Valerie and Bradley inside. "We need to talk to her after the holidays," Bradley was saying. "That house is too big for her, and she's not getting any younger." "I know," Valerie sighed. "But you know how stubborn she is about keeping Dad's house. Look, the market is hot right now. If she sells, she could get a good price, move into a nice retirement community, and maybe have something left over to help us with the kids' private school tuition next year." "She'll never go for it," Valerie said. "She acts like that house is sacred or something." "I've already talked to Jim at the real estate office," Bradley continued. "He can list it in January. We just need to convince your mom it's for her own good." I stood frozen outside the door, my heart pounding. They were planning to pressure me into selling my home. The home where Richard and I had built our life together. The home that was just one small part of my substantial assets. And they intended to use my supposed financial constraints against me. "It's not like she needs that big house anyway," Valerie added. And honestly, the property taxes alone must be eating up whatever savings she has. We'd be doing her a favor. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I needed fresh air. I slipped out the front door unnoticed and began walking along the snowy sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood. The cold air filled my lungs as I tried to process what I had just heard. Had it really come to this? My own daughter and son-in-law plotting to sell my house from under me to solve their financial problems? The same financial problems they had created through their own extravagant spending and poor choices? As I walked, another memory surfaced. Just before sitting down to Christmas breakfast, I had overheard Sophia saying to her cousin, "Grandma Eleanor gives the worst presents because she's poor. Mom says we have to be nice about it." That comment, coupled with the conversation I had just overheard, crystallized something in my mind. This wasn't just about money or nice things. This was about values, respect, and honesty. For years, I had allowed Valerie and her family to treat me with increasing disrespect while maintaining the fiction that Richard and I had created. But that fiction was now being used against me, and potentially against my grandchildren, who were learning all the wrong lessons about family and money. I pulled out my phone and called Thomas Gardner, my financial advisor of 20 years and one of the few people who knew the full extent of my wealth. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he answered warmly. "Merry Christmas, Thomas. I apologize for calling on the holiday." "Not at all. Is everything all right?" "Actually, no," I replied. "I need your help with something. Could you email me the current portfolio summary and bring a few key documents to my house tomorrow? I think it's time for my family to learn about Richard's and my investments." Thomas was silent for a moment. "Are you sure, Eleanor? You and Richard were always so private about your finances." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time for some truths to be told." After ending the call, I stood in the snow for a few more minutes, gathering my resolve. Then I turned and walked back to the house, my decision made. Tonight, after Christmas dinner, everything would change. When I re-entered the house, no one had even noticed my absence. The day continued with brunch, followed by the adults exchanging gifts. I smiled and participated in conversations, all while a plan formed in my mind. I texted briefly with Thomas, confirming details for the following day. That evening, the Christmas dinner was even more elaborate than the previous night's meal. Everyone dressed formally, with Valerie wearing a designer dress that I recognized from a luxury department store window, likely costing thousands. The meal was delicious, but I barely tasted it, mentally preparing for what was to come. As dessert was being served, I gently tapped my water glass with my spoon. The table gradually quieted, and curious eyes turned toward me. "I have something I'd like to share with all of you," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The silence that followed was deafening. Valerie was the first to recover, her expression shifting from shock to a forced smile. "Mom, this is wonderful news. We had no idea. Of course, this changes everything. You should absolutely keep your house if that's what makes you happy. In fact, why don't we look at renovating it? We could update the kitchen or add that sunroom you always wanted." I shook my head slowly. "Valerie, you're missing the point. This isn't about what I can now afford in your eyes. It's about how quickly your attitude has changed now that you know I have money." Bradley jumped in. "Eleanor, we're just excited for you. This opens up so many possibilities. And of course for the family as a whole. The children's education, family vacations together." "I've made some decisions," I interrupted firmly. "Thomas is coming to my house tomorrow with documents. I'm establishing a charitable foundation that will receive the majority of my estate eventually." "A foundation?" Valerie repeated, her voice rising. "But what about your family? What about your grandchildren's future?" "The foundation will focus on providing educational opportunities for disadvantaged children," I continued. "Richard and I both believed strongly in education as a path to independence and fulfillment. The foundation will honor that belief." "But surely there will still be provisions for family," Bradley pressed, unable to hide his concern. "I've set up modest trust funds for Sophia and Noah," I explained. "They'll receive access to part of the funds for college, with the remainder available when they turn 30. However, there's a condition. They must complete 500 hours of community service before any funds are released." Community service? Valerie exclaimed. Mom, they're just children. They have years to fulfill the requirement, I replied calmly. The experience will teach them the value of giving back, and hopefully help them develop empathy and perspective. Bradley's business instincts took over. Eleanor, while I certainly respect your philanthropic intentions, I think we should discuss this further. Perhaps my firm could help manage the foundation's assets. We could keep it all in the family, so to speak. The foundation will be managed by Thomas Gardner and a board of directors with experience in education and nonprofit management, I said firmly. The structure is already in place. Valerie's facade of excitement had completely crumbled. So that's it? You're giving your fortune to strangers instead of your own daughter and grandchildren? After all we've done for you. The irony of her statement hung in the air. After all they had done for me? Like relegating me to the attic and planning to pressure me into selling my home? Valerie, I said gently, what exactly have you done for me in recent years? When was the last time you visited me without wanting something? When did you last call just to check on me? When have you shown me the respect and consideration that should be afforded to any person, let alone your mother? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from genuine remorse or frustration at the potential loss of inheritance. I'm going to get my things now, I said, standing up from the table. I'll be leaving tonight. Leaving? Valerie gasped. But it's Christmas night. Where will you go? I've called my friend Martha. She's expecting me, I replied. Martha had been my close friend for decades, one of the few people who knew about my financial situation. Mom, don't be ridiculous. You can't leave on Christmas, Valerie protested. Look, I'm sorry about the attic. You can have our bedroom tonight. Bradley and I will take the attic. The sudden reversal would have been comical if it weren't so sad. This isn't about the sleeping arrangements, Valerie. It's about years of being treated as if I were less valuable, because you thought I had less money. It's about the values being taught to my grandchildren. It's about respect and genuine love, which shouldn't be contingent on financial status. I left the stunned dinner table and climbed the ladder to the attic one last time. As I packed my small suitcase, memories of Richard flooded my mind. You were right to be cautious about revealing our wealth, I whispered to his memory. But I think you'd agree it was time for some truth. When I descended with my suitcase, Valerie was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes red from crying. Mom, please don't go. We can talk about this. I know we've made mistakes, but we can do better. I set down my suitcase and took her hands in mine. I hope so, Valerie. I truly do. But right now, I need some distance to think, and you and Bradley need to do some serious reflection about what kind of people you want to be and what values you want to instill in your children. But the foundation, the trusts, you're really going through with that? She asked. Yes, I confirmed. Though nothing is finalized yet. There's still time for genuine change, but it has to come from real understanding, not from the prospect of inheritance. Bradley appeared in the hallway. Eleanor, at least let me drive you to Martha's house. It's dark and it's been snowing. Martha is already on her way, I replied. But thank you for the offer. We stood awkwardly in the foyer until headlights appeared in the driveway. Bradley opened the front door, and Martha's reliable sedan pulled up. Merry Christmas, Eleanor, he said stiffly as I prepared to leave. We'll be in touch. Sophia and Noah appeared, curious about the commotion. Are you leaving, Grandma? Noah asked. I knelt down to their level. Yes, sweethearts. But I'll see you again soon, I promise. Are you mad at Mom and Dad? Sophia asked perceptively. No, not mad, I replied truthfully. Just sad about some things. But sometimes being sad helps us learn and grow. I hugged them both, then straightened and picked up my suitcase. As I walked out the door into the snowy night, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness at the breakdown in family relationships, but also a sense of liberation and hope that perhaps this difficult truth would eventually lead to healing. Martha hugged me warmly as I got into her car. You finally told them? She asked as we pulled away from the grand house with its twinkling Christmas lights. Yes, I replied, watching the house recede in the side mirror. It was time. As we drove through the quiet, snow-covered streets, I felt no regret for my decision, only a profound hope that this painful revelation might eventually lead my family back to the values that truly matter. 6 months after that fateful Christmas night, I sat in my new condo overlooking the river. I had decided to sell my house after all, but on my own terms and timing. The large family home where Richard and I had raised Valerie held precious memories, but it was time for a change. My new space was smaller but elegantly appointed, with large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. It felt like a fresh start. The Eleanor and Richard Thompson Educational Foundation was now officially established. We had awarded our first round of scholarships to 15 deserving students who would be the first in their families to attend college. Thomas Gardner and the board had developed a comprehensive program that not only provided financial support, but also mentoring and internship opportunities. Seeing the joy and gratitude on the faces of those students during our award ceremony had confirmed that I had made the right decision. The first weeks after Christmas had been difficult. Valerie had called repeatedly, alternating between tearful apologies and indignant defenses of her behavior. Bradley had sent emails outlining various investment and tax strategies for my consideration, still seemingly unable to understand that my issues with him went far deeper than financial management. I maintained a polite distance, explaining that I needed time to process everything. I suggested that they might benefit from reflection as well. To their credit, after the initial shock wore off, both Valerie and Bradley seemed to begin a genuine process of soul-searching. About 2 months after Christmas, Valerie called with a different tone in her voice. "Mom, I've been talking to a therapist," she admitted. "I didn't want to at first, but Bradley and I have been having problems and I finally agreed to go. We've been discussing my relationship with money and status and, well, it's been eye-opening." That conversation marked a turning point. Gradually, Valerie began to open up about insecurities that had driven her materialistic behavior. She confessed that she had always felt she needed to prove herself through possessions and status, partly because she had internalized a distorted understanding of success. "Dad was always so smart about money, and you were so successful in real estate," she explained during one of our coffee meetings. "I think I felt I couldn't measure up to that, so I focused on having things instead of building things." Family therapy sessions followed, sometimes painful but ultimately productive. Bradley, to my surprise, revealed his own insecurities stemming from pressure from his parents to maintain a certain lifestyle even when his business struggled. He admitted that he had begun making risky investments trying to recover losses, digging himself deeper into financial trouble. With my encouragement, they consulted a financial advisor who helped them develop a realistic plan to scale back their lifestyle and address their debt. They sold their oversized house and moved to a smaller but still comfortable home. Bradley refocused his investment firm on ethical, sustainable investments, finding a niche that aligned better with his actual values, rather than the image he had tried to project. The most encouraging changes came from my grandchildren. At first, Sophia and Noah were confused and upset by the family turmoil. But children are remarkably adaptable, and as they observed their parents making changes, they began to adjust their own expectations and behavior. 3 months after Christmas, Sophia asked if she could volunteer at one of the foundation's weekend literacy programs. "I want to start on my community service hours," she explained. "And Mom said you help kids learn to read." Watching my 12-year-old granddaughter sitting patiently with a 7-year-old struggling reader, I felt a swell of hope. Perhaps the values Richard and I had tried to instill were finding their way to the next generation after all. Noah, not to be outdone by his sister, asked to help with a community garden project the foundation sponsored. His enthusiasm for growing vegetables surprised everyone, including himself. "Grandma, did you know you can grow your own food instead of buying it at the store?" he asked me with wide-eyed wonder after his first day volunteering. By summer, we had established a new kind of family relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and backsliding. Old habits and attitudes don't disappear overnight. But there was authentic effort in growing awareness, which was all I had ever hoped for. One evening in June, as I sat on my condo balcony watching the sunset, my phone rang. It was Valerie. "Mom, we've been thinking about Christmas this year," she said. "We were wondering if we could all come to your place instead. Something simple. Maybe we could even cook together instead of hiring caterers." I smiled at the view before me, at the river flowing steadily onward. "I'd like that very much," I replied. "And Mom," she added hesitantly, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just about last Christmas, but for years of not seeing you, the real you. For valuing things more than relationships. I'm working on it, but I want you to know that I recognize it now." After we hung up, I sat quietly reflecting on the painful journey of the past 6 months. The revelation of my wealth had been a catalyst, but the real change had come from confronting deeper truths about values, respect, and love. Money could destroy relationships, as I had feared for so many years, but it could also, when approached with wisdom, become a tool for growth and healing. Richard would have been proud of how things had unfolded. Not the pain and conflict, of course, but the ultimate movement toward authenticity and better values. He had always believed that adversity could lead to growth if faced with courage and honesty. The foundation was flourishing, my family was healing, and I had found a new chapter of life that felt purposeful and genuine. The painful Christmas in the attic had led to necessary growth for all of us. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we need most desperately to hear. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that caused short-term pain but led to long-term healing in your family? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the true meaning of wealth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritances have nothing to do with money.